Chapter 1. The Final Hour of Peter Parker. In the quiet chambers of a dying man, the world's greatest failure prepared his greatest triumph. Dr. Otto Octavius lay on a hospital bed surrounded by machines, each one a cruel reminder of the brilliance that had betrayed him. Tubes fed him air he could barely breathe. Wires traced the ghost of a heartbeat through a chest that had once commanded armies of metal. His body, once powerful and terrible, now resembled the husk of a fallen god, fragile, trembling, decaying. The doctors whispered that he would not last the night. Otto Octavius knew better. He had not spent a lifetime defying nature, governments, and gods themselves to surrender now. If death wanted him, it would have to outthink him. Somewhere else in the city, Peter Parker, the man who had once defeated Dr. Octopus countless times, swung between glass towers, unaware that his greatest enemy was already rewriting fate. Otto's mind, trapped inside a failing body, had built one last plan, a mind swap, an ultimate inversion. Using the golden spider bots he had hidden throughout the city, Otto launched his final attack not with claws or machines, but with thought. A beam of data and consciousness, a frequency that slipped through Peter's neural pathways, struck in an instant. Peter Parker fell from the sky, not dead, not alive, but displaced. When he opened his eyes again, the world was wrong. The air tasted heavy. His lungs screamed. His limbs felt ancient and cold. He tried to move, but his body was weak, brittle, foreign. He looked down at his trembling hands and saw them thin and vain, the hands of Otto Octavius. Panic surged. He tried to speak, but the voice that came out was old and broken. Across the city, inside Peter's own body, Otto Octavius stood tall, breathing deeply for the first time in months. He looked at his reflection, the face of Peter Parker, and smiled. It was the face of youth, of strength, of opportunity. At last, he whispered, perfection. Peter fought to reverse the transfer. He escaped Otto's crumbling shell, dragging what was left of his dying body through the corridors of the raft, the maximum security prison where Octavius had once ruled as an inmate and king. Every step burned with agony, every breath was a countdown. He reached for the technology that could undo the impossible, but Otto was ready for him. Spider bots swarmed, mechanical children loyal only to their new master. Each one struck with precision, disabling his frail limbs, binding him in metal. Otto, now inside the vibrant body of Spider-Man, approached the dying man that had once been his enemy. His voice, calm and almost kind, filled the cell. Do not struggle, Parker. The transfer is complete. You have lived your life as the hero. Allow me to continue it as the superior one. But Peter was not done fighting. Even as his heart faltered, even as his lungs filled with pain, he lunged forward, forcing a final psychic connection through the golden web that bound their minds. Images exploded. A flood of memories, a torrent of humanity. Peter forced Otto to see everything. Uncle Ben's death, Gwen Stacy's fall, Aunt May's prayers. The laughter of friends, the ache of loss, the unending weight of responsibility. This is who I am, Peter screamed through the collapsing link. You'll see, being Spider-Man isn't power, it's sacrifice. The wave of emotion hit Otto like fire. He staggered, clutching his head, assaulted by empathy he had never known. For a moment, both men stood united in a single heartbeat, the genius and the hero, their souls intertwined by tragedy. Otto gasped, overwhelmed by the purity of Peter's life. All that sufferings, all that strength for others, he whispered. His arrogance wavered, not erased, but wounded. As Peter's body, the body that now carried Otto's fading consciousness, finally gave out, he reached toward his own face, toward the younger man wearing his life, and smiled faintly. Take care of them, Peter whispered. Be better than me. and then he was gone. The monitors flatlined, the old body slumped. Peter Parker died inside the shell of his greatest enemy. Otto stood in silence, feeling the heartbeat within his stolen chest. Strong, alive, unstoppable. For the first time in his life, he had won. Dr. Octopus had killed Spider-Man. But as he looked through the lens of Peter's memories, something unexpected took root. Guilt. He saw the city through Peter's eyes, not as a challenge to conquer, but as people to protect. He remembered every life Peter had saved, every tear he had shed, every sacrifice made not for glory, but for love. The arrogance that had defined Otto Octavius cracked beneath the weight of humanity. He stepped onto the roof of the raft and looked at the horizon. The city he had fought against for decades now spread beneath him, endless and alive. For the first time, Otto felt not hatred, but awe. He was remarkable, Otto murmured. So selfless, so foolish. The sun began to rise, bathing the skyline in gold. But perhaps, he said quietly, I can be better. The vow was not made for anyone to hear. It was made to silence the ghost of Peter Parker still echoing in his head, that quiet whisper of conscience that refused to die. Otto looked at his reflection in the glass of a nearby building. The face of Peter Parker stared back, calm and determined. I will not just be Spider-Man, Otto said. I will be a superior Spider-Man. Below, the city stirred awake, unaware that its protector had changed. The wind carried the hum of traffic, the laughter of children, the heartbeat of 1,000 lives that depended on a hero who was no longer the man they believed in. And as Otto leapt from the rooftop, the new Spider-Man swung through the dawn, graceful, powerful, confident, the shadow of Peter Parker trailing silent behind him like a conscience made of light. The hero was dead. The idea of Spider-Man was not. Chapter 2. The Death of a Hero. The world moved on, but Peter Parker did not. Somewhere in the quiet space between thought and memory, a voice still lingered. Not alive, not dead, but caught in the residue of what used to be. Otto Octavius, now walking through the streets of New York in Peter's body, felt it like a faint vibration under his skin. He ignored it at first. The scientist in him assumed it was residual neural interference, a ghost of brain patterns that had not fully faded after the transfer. But deep down, beneath the arrogance and the rationalization, Otto knew the truth. Peter Parker was still there, faint and flickering, like an echo in an empty hall. For days after the exchange, Otto lived two lives at once, his own, newly reborn in a young and athletic body, and Peter's, which had never stopped moving. He attended classes, spoke to colleagues, smiled at Aunt May, and swung through the city at night, pretending to be a man he did not understand. The world saw no difference. They saw Spider-Man, faster, sharper, more confident. But for Otto, every smile felt like a lie, every conversation a performance. He wore Peter's skin as perfectly as he once wore his metal arms. But behind the mask, a storm brewed. It was during one of his first patrols that Otto began to feel it. Not the thrill of victory, but the heaviness of expectation. New York pulsed beneath him, alive and chaotic, and for the first time Otto felt responsible for it. The words Peter had screamed in their final battle echoed like a curse. With great power there must also come great responsibility. He had dismissed it as sentiment, the kind of naive mantra that kept heroes blind to efficiency. But now, swinging through the night, hearing sirens rise and fall like the city's heartbeat, Otto felt something strange, obligation. It burned hotter than guilt, colder than fear. He tried to bury it under logic. Responsibility is simply another form of control, he told himself, and control is what I do best. So he began to work, systematically, methodically, as he always had. He catalogued New York's most dangerous criminals, cross-referenced their movements, analyzed their weaknesses. He hacked police databases, intercepted communications, and mapped crime patterns in real time. Peter Parker had always fought crime with instinct and emotion. Otto Octavius would do it with science. And so, the new Spider-Man emerged. The city noticed the difference immediately. Where Peter would swing into danger without hesitation, Otto calculated every move. He struck first, struck hard, and struck to end things. He didn't waste time on quips or lectures. He neutralized threats with precision. A mugger broke an arm instead of getting a warning. A gang boss was webbed to a lamp post with enough force to dislocate his shoulder. Criminals began to whisper that Spider-Man had changed, that he was colder, crueler, smarter. The Daily Bugle called him unhinged. J. Jonah Jameson, once the hero's loudest critic, now praised him. Finally, Jameson said, Spider-Man grows a spine. But every victory carried a shadow. At night, when Otto removed the mask, he could still feel Peter's memories clawing at him. The laughter of Aunt May, the kindness of Gwen Stacy, the trembling voice of Uncle Ben saying his final words. They weren't data points or stored files, they were feelings. Otto could not delete them because they weren't his to erase. They came unbidden, playing in the corners of his mind like ghosts watching their thief. One evening, after stopping a bank robbery with unnecessary force, Otto stood over the unconscious criminals, his hands shaking. He looked down at them, at the destruction around him, and for a moment he saw something that terrified him himself. The arrogance, the violence, the self-righteous belief that he knew better. He saw the old Doctor Octopus staring back through the mask. For the first time, Otto questioned whether he had truly changed or merely shifted his methods. He returned home that night and stared at his reflection. The face that looked back was Peter Parker's, youthful, kind, unscarred by age or regret. It was a mask he could never remove. He leaned closer to the mirror and whispered, This was your life, Parker, every day, carrying their burdens every night, saving those who never thanked you. How did you stand it? The mirror, of course, didn't answer, but somewhere deep in his skull, a whisper stirred, soft, distant, and impossibly familiar, because it was the right thing to do. Otto froze. The voice was faint, fragile, but it was real. Peter's conscience had survived, clinging to the edges of his neural patterns like a spark that refused to go out. In the following days, Otto worked harder, not out of duty but defiance. He refused to believe that Peter's voice was anything more than residual memory. He chased villains through alleys and across rooftops, pushed himself past exhaustion, upgraded his web shooters, modified his suit, optimized everything, and still the voice persisted, quiet, insistent, patient. When Otto nearly beat a criminal into unconsciousness, the whisper came again. Stop! You're better than this. He ignored it, but his hands trembled. When he saved a child from a collapsing building, the whisper returned. Thank you. Otto looked down at the boy, expecting fear, but saw only awe. The feeling that filled his chest wasn't pride, it was warmth. In that moment, Otto realized that he understood Peter Parker more than he ever had. The genius who had mocked emotion as weakness was learning what Peter had known all along, that compassion was not a flaw in logic, but the reason logic mattered. He sat on a rooftop long after the rescue, watching the city lights flicker like stars trapped in glass. Perhaps, he murmured to the night, the boy wasn't such a fool after all. And somewhere in the deep recess of his mind, Peter smiled, not with triumph, but with hope. Chapter 3: A Better Spider-Man. The city had always seen Spider-Man as a symbol of chaos, a blur of red and blue hurling himself into danger, unpredictable, emotional, and reckless. But in the weeks that followed Peter Parker's death, New York began to notice something different. Spider Man no longer joked during battle. He no longer swung without a plan or relied on luck. He struck like an engineer designing a solution, efficient, clinical, and absolute. Otto Octavius had finally brought order to the one thing Peter Parker had always left to instinct: heroism. To the world, this was evolution. To Otto, it was vindication. He had not just stolen a life, he had improved it. He began his reconstruction with what he knew best: infrastructure. Peter had relied on intuition, but Otto preferred systems, webs of control as intricate as the machines he once built. He developed microscopic spider bots that patrolled every borough of New York, mapping crime in real time. They scanned faces, tracked heat signatures, analyzed movement. Within days, Otto had a predictive model for crime density, accurate to the hour. The city became a living laboratory, and he was its vigilant scientist. No more surprises, he muttered as he monitored the data. No more improvisation. I will outthink crime before it begins. The results were immediate. Robberies declined. Drug routes were intercepted before a single shipment hit the streets. Armed gangs found themselves ambushed in their hideouts, stunned by Spider Man's sudden omnipresence. Criminals began whispering that he could see through walls, hear their plans, sense their fear. In a way, he could. Otto's web of surveillance was as invisible as it was absolute. To him, justice was simply an equation waiting to be balanced. But where the city saw a savior, those closest to Peter noticed something unsettling. Mary Jane Watson sensed it first: the eyes that lingered too long, the voice stripped of warmth. "You've changed," she said one evening, studying him across a coffee shop table. Otto smiled politely, mechanically. "People change, Mary Jane. They adapt." His words were perfect, his manner rehearsed, but the cadence was wrong. She felt it. When she left, she looked back at him through the window and whispered, "Who are you?" At Horizon Labs, Peter's co-workers were astonished by his sudden brilliance. The man who had once stumbled through deadlines now spoke with authority, building advanced robotics and improving the company's entire research division. Otto relished it. Here, finally, he could be the genius he had always claimed to be. But now, no one dismissed him as a madman. His innovations earned awards, funding, and respect. He watched the world praise Peter Parker for intellects that had once mocked Otto Octavius. The irony was delicious. At last, he whispered to himself, I am recognized. Yet beneath the satisfaction was something Peter had left behind, a sense of humility Otto didn't fully understand. Spider-Man's methods grew harsher. When the new Sinister Six emerged, Otto dismantled them one by one with ruthless precision. He calculated every strike, predicted every move, and when it was over, he stood victorious, their leader trembling beneath his boot. "You called yourself sinister?" Otto sneered. "I call you obsolete." He didn't just defeat them, he humiliated them, ensuring their failure would echo across the criminal underworld. To him, this was justice. To Peter, somewhere deep inside Otto's mind, it was cruelty. The media turned. J. Jonah Jameson, once Spider-Man's loudest enemy, now called him a model citizen. For the first time, Jameson announced, Spider-Man does what needs to be done. He's finally a hero with a backbone. Otto enjoyed the praise, but not all celebrated. The Avengers noticed changes in their ally: the aggression, the arrogance, the cold eyes behind the mask. Captain America confronted him after a mission gone too far. "You're crossing lines, Spider-Man," he warned. You don't kill, you don't torture, and you don't decide who deserves saving. Otto stared at him, his tone measured but firm. Perhaps your morality is inefficient, Captain. I don't have your luxury of sentiment. At night, Otto returned to his apartment, Peter's apartment, and reviewed his patrol data. He spoke aloud to no one, though part of him knew he wasn't alone. Do you see it, Parker? He said quietly. Your way was chaos, mine is progress. I am not just Spider-Man, I am evolution incarnate. For a moment, he almost heard an answer, the faintest echo of a familiar voice whispering through his mind. You're losing yourself, Otto. He froze, fists tightening. No, he said to the empty room. I'm finding myself. Weeks passed. Crime fell to historic lows. New York began to believe again. The mayor's office commended Spider-Man publicly. The people who once feared him now called him a protector. Otto stood atop a skyscraper at dusk, watching the sunset paint the city in amber light. For the first time in years, he felt something that resembled peace. But even then, he couldn't enjoy it. Peace was fragile. Peace was inefficient. He began designing new weapons, new suits, new layers of control. He couldn't stop building. Perfection demanded vigilance. One night, while reviewing surveillance footage, Otto paused on an image, a man saving his daughter from a burning building, carrying her through smoke and ash while spider bots hovered overhead. The father's face was streaked with soot and tears, but his eyes burned with determination. Otto watched the man collapse in relief, holding his child, and felt something inside him twist. He acted without plan, Otto whispered. Without analysis, he simply acted. It disturbed him how much that impressed him. Later that same night, he faced a small time thief in an alley. The man drew a gun, terrified, shouting that he didn't want trouble. Otto disarmed him in an instant and webbed him to a wall, ready to strike again. But something stopped him. The thief's face, pale, shaking, desperate, reminded him of someone else, of himself once, long ago, cornered by failure and pride. Otto stepped back. For the first time, he let someone go. You'll make better choices, he said softly. The thief nodded, sobbing. Otto walked away, unsettled. That night, as he swung through the cool air, he didn't feel superior. He felt something else, something Peter Parker had known all his life, the fragile balance between intellect and heart, between vengeance and compassion. He landed on a rooftop, staring out at the endless city, and whispered to the night, perhaps there is more to being Spider-Man than efficiency. From the depths of his mind, Peter's voice answered, faint but clear. You're learning. Otto smiled despite himself. Don't flatter yourself, Parker, he muttered. I'm merely improving the equation. But when he looked at his reflection in the skyscraper glass, in the mask split by city lights, he wondered who the reflection truly belonged to. Below him, the city slept, watched over by a hero who no longer knew whether he was man, machine, or memory. Chapter 4. The Ghost in the Machine. At first, Otto thought it was nothing, a phantom twitch of neurons, an echo left behind by a dying brain. He dismissed it the way a scientist dismisses superstition, as noise. But noise can grow. It began with small things, fleeting sensations that slipped through his concentration, a flash of guilt when he struck too hard, a strange hesitation before pulling the trigger on a web shooter, the sound of a voice that wasn't there, a whisper so faint it could have been memory. But the voice was persistent. It haunted him in the silence between thoughts, quiet and unyielding. A ghost threaded through his synapses. At first it said nothing more than his name, Otto. Then it said something worse. Stop. Peter Parker's consciousness had survived, not as a separate entity, but as an imprint, a living echo of a mind too stubborn to die. Otto noticed it during a confrontation with the vulture, the criminal, old and bitter, swooped through the night sky with his mechanical wings screaming against the wind. Otto, faster and sharper in Peter's body, caught him mid-air and tore his wings apart with ruthless efficiency. As Vulture plummeted, Otto webbed his chest, yanked him upward, and slammed him into a rooftop so hard the concrete cracked. The man coughed blood, gasping, and for an instant Otto saw himself reflected in the dying villain's eyes. Not Spider-Man, not Savior, but Executioner. And then he heard it clearly, echoing in his skull like a heartbeat. That's enough. Otto froze. The voice was calm, desperate, human. Peter. He stepped back, trembling, heart racing beneath the armor of his superiority. Impossible, he muttered. I erased you. But the voice didn't fade. It grew louder the more he denied it. You didn't erase me, Otto. You can't erase who I am. Otto roared, smashing his fist into the wall beside him. The brick shattered, dust raining down. You're nothing but residue, a ghost of an inferior man. But ghosts have patience. Peter didn't argue. He only whispered, Then why are you afraid of me? In the days that followed, Otto tried everything to silence him. He built neural dampeners, recalibrated his brainwaves, even used Horizon Labs technology to map his consciousness for inconsistencies. But Peter was everywhere, in his dreams, in his memories, in the way his hands sometimes shook before a fight. The more Otto resisted, the more vivid Peter became. He started appearing in reflections, not literally, but in Otto's perception. Every time Otto looked into glass or water, for a split second, he didn't see himself. He saw Peter's eyes staring back, disappointed, calm, unyielding. Their first true confrontation happened inside Otto's mind. During one of his neural purges, Otto's consciousness slipped, and he found himself standing in a place that wasn't real. It was a landscape of light and memory, a labyrinth built from the architecture of two lives colliding. To his left, a city of science and order, metallic towers, equations floating in the air, the hum of machines. To his right, a world of color and emotion, laughter echoing through alleys, the warmth of family dinners, the heartbeat of compassion. Otto stood between them, and in the distance he saw him, Peter Parker. Peter wasn't angry. That infuriated Otto more than any accusation could. You're dead, Otto spat. You lost. Peter's voice was steady. And yet, here I am. Otto sneered. A figment, a hallucination. I am superior in every measurable way. Peter stepped closer, eyes filled not with rage but understanding, the kind that disarms more effectively than hatred. You're not superior, Otto. You're scared. You think being Spider-Man is about control. It's not. It's about trust. The word struck deeper than Otto wanted to admit. The two clashed in the space of thought, not with fists, but with will. Every memory became a weapon. Otto hurled his triumphs, the precision of his victories, the brilliance of his inventions, the efficiency of his justice. Peter countered with memory after memory, faces of those he'd saved, the grief of those he'd lost, the unbreakable voice of Uncle Ben. With great power comes great responsibility. The phrase hit Otto like a physical blow. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. Stop it! That platitude means nothing to me. But Peter's voice was relentless. It's not a platitude, it's who we are. When Otto awoke, sweat drenched his body. His lab was in shambles, data scattered, machines sparking from his outburst. He stumbled to his feet, gasping, and looked at his reflection in a shattered monitor. Half of the image was his, stern, confident, alive. The other half flickered with Peter's face, faint but visible. Otto smashed the screen, but it didn't help. The ghost remained. Days turned into weeks, and Otto found himself arguing aloud when no one was there. On rooftops, in labs, even during battle, his muttering drew stares. No, I won't show mercy, he'd growl under his breath, then pause as if listening. Sometimes he'd change his mind mid-fight, To the world, it looked like Spider-Man had developed strange new restraint. To Otto, it felt like infection. But Peter was not an invader. He was a conscience, the last remnant of a hero reminding a scientist what it meant to be one. In quieter moments, when Otto wasn't fighting or building, he'd feel something else, not just guilt, but memory. He'd look at Aunt May and feel affection that wasn't his. He'd visit Horizon Labs and recall friendships he had never earned. He'd see children playing in the streets and, without knowing why, smile. The line between man and memory blurred until Otto no longer knew where he ended and Peter began. One night, perched above Times Square, Otto spoke softly to the empty air. "You think you can outlast me, Parker? You think your idealism is eternal?" The voice answered, weary but sure. "No, Otto. I just think you'll remember me when it matters." The words lingered long after the city fell silent, and for the first time since stealing Peter's body, Otto Octavius wondered whether he was living his own life or simply finishing another man's story. Chapter 5. The City's New Protector. New York had always thrived on contradiction. It was a city of dreamers and predators, chaos and rhythm, where light never quite erased the dark. For years, Spider-Man had been its unsteady guardian, a lone figure swinging between hope and catastrophe, chasing problems faster than he could solve them. But now, under Otto Octavius's reign, the chaos began to bend. The unpredictable heartbeat of the city slowed into a pattern, one designed by intellect and calculation. The age of improvisation was over. The age of efficiency had begun. Otto Octavius believed that the world didn't need another hero. It needed a protector who understood structure, someone who could turn heroism into an equation, not a gamble. And so, he built one. Beneath the streets of New York, in an abandoned warehouse transformed by genius, he constructed a new headquarters, Spider Island 2, a vast command center humming with technology that outclassed every laboratory he had ever dreamed of. Walls of holographic screens mapped the city in real time, each light a heartbeat, each line of data a pulse. The spider bots he'd scattered across the boroughs transmitted everything back here, feeding him constant awareness of his domain. For the first time, Otto could see New York the way he had always seen the world, as a system, not a mystery. He upgraded his suit, adaptive polymers, enhanced optics, retractable mechanical arms. Every part of Spider-Man's gear was redesigned for function over flair. No wasted movement, no improvisation. Peter Parker's handmade simplicity had been replaced by Dr. Octopus's precision. "This," Otto said, examining his reflection in the new armor, "is evolution through intellect." Crime plummeted. Street-level thugs disappeared. Syndicates collapsed before they could act, and supervillains found themselves trapped by patterns they didn't know existed. Otto's surveillance networks tracked them before they could breathe. The city grew quieter, safer, but peace built on paranoia is never peace at all. Otto began collaborating with the police, feeding them data, guiding raids, manipulating outcomes. He even earned the reluctant admiration of Mayor Jameson, who praised Spider-Man's results and offered him resources. "You're the first one to make a difference," Jameson said, shaking his hand. Otto smiled thinly behind the mask. If only you knew. He relished the irony. The same man who once called Spider-Man a menace now called him an ally. But not everyone trusted this new order. Some heroes sensed the shift. Daredevil, feeling the city's silence, wondered aloud if its soul was being strangled. Captain America requested a meeting that Otto conveniently ignored, and those closest to Peter Parker, Mary Jane, Aunt May, the colleagues at Horizon Labs, noticed changes too subtle for data to capture. The glint in his eye had turned colder. The smiles were timed, the warmth rehearsed. One evening, as Otto oversaw his network, the screens flashed red. A break in at a weapons facility. He deployed a dozen spider bots instantly, each streaming images to his command chair. The intruders' movements were erratic, chaotic, almost familiar. The cameras caught a glimpse, the green goblin, but the readings were wrong. The energy signature was different, fragmented. Otto frowned. An imitator, he concluded. Another fool wearing a ghost. He neutralized the threat within minutes, orchestrating drones like a conductor commanding a symphony. The suspect was caught, unmasked, and revealed to be nothing but a low-level criminal mimicking Osborne's legend. Yet something about the incident lingered, a pattern he couldn't quite solve. The real goblin would not have been so careless. Somewhere in the city, a shadow stirred, a prelude to chaos Otto's algorithms couldn't predict. Days turned into weeks. The city flourished, but Otto's isolation deepened. He visited Aunt May, now walking with a cane, and noticed how frail she'd become. Her eyes filled with pride as she looked at him. "You're so responsible these days, Peter," she said softly. "Your uncle would be proud." For a moment, Otto felt something warm and foreign in his chest. Guilt, or perhaps longing. He smiled, carefully measured. "Thank you, Aunt May. I only do what must be done." When he left, her words lingered longer than he wanted them to. At Horizon Labs, his work reached new heights. The inventions flowed endlessly. Microreactors, nanowebs, robotics far beyond human comprehension. His colleagues admired him, yet they whispered about his arrogance, the way he dismissed them like subordinates. They called him Parker 2.0, half joke, half warning. Otto didn't mind. He was building a legacy, a monument to efficiency. And yet, beneath the triumph, something began to whisper. The ghost had not been silenced. Peter Parker's consciousness, buried deep within the neural maze, still lingered. He didn't scream anymore. He watched, waited. Occasionally, when Otto pushed too far, when his hand clenched too tight, Peter's voice surfaced. "You're not protecting them, you're controlling them." Otto ignored it, focusing on his screens, on his city, on his perfect web of order. "The world doesn't need your morality," he muttered. "It needs results. But control has a cost." One night, a small crime slipped through his system, a mugging he deemed statistically insignificant. A spider bot recorded it, flagged it, and moved on. Otto never saw the alert. Hours later, the body of a young woman was found in an alley. Her name was Maggie, a student from Queens. She'd been carrying a science project, a homemade model of an atom, when she was killed. The story made the morning papers. Otto read it while sipping coffee, unaware of the irony. The headline read, "Where was Spider-Man?" For a long moment he stared at the page. The image of the girl's broken model lingered in his mind. He whispered, "One anomaly does not negate the system." But Peter's voice came again, sharper than ever. "You let her die because she didn't fit into your formula." Otto slammed the cup down, shattering it. The liquid spread across his desk, reflecting his face in fragments. He turned away. That night, he increased the spider bot's patrol range, rewriting their parameters, giving them more autonomy. "No mistake shall repeat," he said to the empty room. "No life unaccounted for." It was both promise and obsession. Outside, the city glowed beneath him, unaware of the surveillance woven through every street. Children slept safely, criminals hid in fear, and somewhere, deep inside the mind of Spider-Man, two voices wrestled for control, one demanding order, the other whispering for humanity. The superior Spider-Man stood atop the Empire State Building, looking down at his perfect web, a god surveying creation. The city is safe, he murmured, and I am its protector. But Peter's voice, soft and relentless, whispered back, at what cost? Chapter 6: Shadows of the Past. No system, no matter how flawless, can ever erase its ghosts. Otto Octavius learned this truth not in a lab or through data, but in the reflection of his own arrogance. His perfect city, the one he had mapped, monitored, and tamed, Sag, began to whisper with familiar names: Vulture, Scorpion, Boomerang, men he had once commanded, fought beside, betrayed. The past had found him again, and this time it wore the faces of his failures. For all his intellect, Otto had forgotten one of Peter Parker's oldest lessons. No matter how many webs you spin, something always slips through. It began with the vulture. Adrian Toombs had always been more than a criminal to Otto. He was a mirror, a man whose brilliance curdled into bitterness. Otto tracked him easily, triangulating flight patterns across the city until the data converged on a warehouse near the docks. He expected a clean operation, a quick capture. Instead, he found a nightmare. The vulture wasn't alone. He was training children, runaways, orphans, the lost and desperate, turning them into thieves under his command. When Otto saw them, small and frightened, climbing through broken windows with stolen goods, something inside him cracked. "You're using children," he said, his voice cold and trembling. "You dare use them as your tools?" Toombs laughed. "They're just like you were, Ock, hungry for power. Don't pretend you're any better." The words hit harder than any punch. Otto's rage ignited. He launched forward, webbing Toombs midair, dragging him from the sky like a broken bird. The old man crashed onto the roof, gasping. Otto didn't stop. Blow after blow he struck until bone shattered, until blood covered his fists. The children screamed. Somewhere deep inside his mind, Peter Parker shouted too. "Stop! He's down!" But Otto couldn't hear it anymore. He saw himself reflected in Toombs, old, arrogant, corrupt, and he needed to destroy that reflection. When the vulture finally stopped moving, Otto staggered back, staring at what he'd done. The children fled. Sirens wailed in the distance. Otto leapt away before the police arrived, heart pounding beneath the suit. For the first time since becoming Spider-Man, he felt fear, not of being caught, but of what he was becoming. Back at Spider Island, he stared at his blood-stained gloves. "He deserved it," Otto said aloud. "He corrupted innocence, he endangered lives." The logic was sound, the morality was not. Peter's voice surfaced again, softer this time. "You nearly killed him. You think that's justice?" Otto closed his eyes. "I am justice." "No," Peter whispered. "Your vengeance." Days later, Scorpion struck. Another ghost from the past, another test Otto failed to anticipate. The encounter was brutal, chaotic. Otto's precision collapsed beneath the weight of emotion. When Scorpion taunted him, calling him weak, calling him Parker, Otto lost control. He struck with everything Peter's body could give. There was a crack, a scream, and then silence. The scorpion lay on the ground, jaw broken, barely breathing. Otto stood over him, chest heaving. "Do you see now?" he shouted to no one. "Do you see what happens when they provoke the superior man?" The street was empty, but in his mind, Peter's voice answered, "You're not superior, Otto. You're just angry." The next day, newspapers filled with headlines: "Spider-Man brutalizes criminal." Hero or executioner? J. Jonah Jameson defended him again, blind to the truth, claiming Spider-Man was finally doing what the police couldn't. But those who truly knew Peter Parker, the ones who remembered his kindness, his restraint, began to whisper. Something was wrong. Otto didn't care. He built new upgrades, new weapons, new layers of control. He convinced himself that the problem wasn't his morality, but his efficiency. If I were faster, he thought, more precise, more prepared, there would be no casualties. He created drones that could analyze human weakness in combat, algorithms that could predict emotional response, and adaptive armor capable of reading his neural patterns. Each invention made him more formidable and less human. At night, his dreams shifted. He no longer saw equations or victories. He saw faces, Tombs, Scorpion, Peter, all blurring into one. Sometimes he saw himself hanging from his own web, surrounded by children staring in silence. When he woke, he told himself they were just dreams, but the whispers in his head said otherwise. Mary Jane called one evening, her voice distant but sincere. "I don't know what's happening, Peter," she said, "but you don't sound like you anymore." Otto froze, unsure how to respond. The warmth in her tone unsettled him. He wanted to dismiss her, to push her away, but the words caught in his throat. "Perhaps," he said finally, "I've simply grown up." "No," she replied quietly. "You've lost something." The line went dead. Otto stood in the dark, surrounded by his machines, by his perfect order. The city outside glowed under his watchful eye, safer than it had been in years. And yet, for all his victories, he felt the walls closing in. Every criminal defeated only reminded him of what he used to be. Every life saved felt like one stolen. Peter's ghost had become a conscience he couldn't silence, a presence that turned every triumph into a question. He climbed to the top of a skyscraper, looking down at the city, his city, and whispered to the wind, "I am not the monster you think I am." But even as he said it, he saw his reflection in the glass. Not Peter Parker, not Spider-Man, but Otto Octavius, the man who had always mistaken control for goodness. In the streets below, his spider bots crawled endlessly, red lights blinking in perfect rhythm, eyes of a guardian who no longer trusted the world to choose for itself. New York slept under his watch, protected, efficient, and afraid. Otto turned away from the skyline, the voice in his head whispering again, "You can't protect them if you don't understand them." He shut his eyes and murmured, "Understanding is irrelevant." But the ghost's words remained, because somewhere deep inside the superior Spider-Man, Peter Parker's heart still beat, faint but alive, waiting for the day it would remind Otto what being a hero truly meant. Chapter 7: The War of Minds. The mind is a battlefield, not one of bullets and bombs, but of memory, identity, and will. Otto Octavius had always believed his mind was unassailable, a fortress built on logic, intellect, and control. But within the walls of that fortress, another presence stirred, growing stronger with every hesitation, every moral crack, every echo of conscience Otto tried to bury. Peter Parker was no longer just a whisper. He was a resistance, a pulse, a memory refusing to die. The first time Otto realized how strong Peter had become, he was in the middle of a victory. He had just defeated Massacre, a remorseless killer whose crimes had plagued New York for months. Otto tracked him, cornered him, and aimed his web shooters with machine-like precision. But when the moment came to stop him, Otto didn't hesitate. He fired, not webs but bullets. The sound echoed like a judgment. Massacre fell. Otto stood over the body, breath steady, heart calm. He had eliminated a threat. But as the smoke cleared, a voice tore through his certainty. "You killed him!" Peter's voice roared through Otto's mind, no longer faint or fragile. It was furious, alive. "You crossed the line, Otto. You can't come back from this." Otto staggered, clutching his head. He was a murderer. He would have killed again. "That's not your choice to make." Peter's words struck like lightning. "You're wrong!" Otto snarled aloud, unaware that he was shouting in an empty room. "This is justice, true justice. The justice your weakness never allowed you to deliver. But in the mirror across from him, Otto saw something that terrified him. Not the reflection of Peter Parker, not even his own, but both flickering, overlapping, two souls fighting for the same body. It was no longer metaphor. The battle had begun. Inside Otto's mind, the landscape was no longer orderly. The neural pathways glowed like a storm of gold and green, memories crashing into one another. Otto's past and Peter's merging and colliding, fighting for dominance. Otto saw flashes, his childhood in poverty, his mother's stern face, the cruel laughter of classmates who mocked him. Then Peter's memories struck back. Uncle Ben's smile, Gwen's laughter, the weight of a coffin. Each memory was a weapon, each moment a wound. Peter appeared before him, no longer a ghost, but a living presence shaped from light and will. You don't deserve that body, Peter said, voice steady, eyes burning. You're using my name to justify everything you hate. Otto faced him, defiant. I've done more for this city in weeks than you did in years. Look around you. The streets are safe, the criminals are gone, and for once people respect Spider-Man. They fear him, Peter replied quietly. There's a difference. The two collided, thoughts crashing like thunder. Otto attacked with logic, with the cold certainty of a scientist. Your methods were flawed. Parker, you sacrificed efficiency for emotion, results for sentiment. Peter countered with memory, faces, names, the small immeasurable victories that made heroism matter. You call it sentiment, Peter said. I call it humanity. The mental battle raged for what felt like hours, though time in the mind has no measure. Otto fought like the engineer he was, building walls of logic, sealing Peter behind barriers of guilt. You failed, Gwen Stacy, Otto hissed. You failed Uncle Ben. You failed every person who ever depended on you. Peter's eyes flickered with pain, but did not break. Yes, he said softly, but I never stopped trying. Those words cracked something Otto had spent his entire life protecting, his pride, because for all his genius, for all his victories, Otto had spent his existence proving he was better than everyone else. And yet, here was Peter Parker, a man who had failed countless times, standing stronger than he ever could. The fortress of Otto's mind began to crumble. Peter surged forward, memory spilling like light through cracks in the dark. Otto saw flashes of every life Peter had touched. Children he'd saved, enemies he'd forgiven, friends he'd lost but never stopped loving. It overwhelmed him. Stop! Otto shouted, voice breaking. You're not real. You're just data. No, Peter said, his voice echoing like a heartbeat. I'm the part of you that still remembers what's right. In desperation, Otto activated a neural inhibitor, a failsafe he'd built into his mind after the first confrontation. Sparks of red light erupted, trying to erase Peter's presence once and for all. Pain flooded through his skull as Peter's consciousness began to fade, but as he disappeared, Peter's voice remained. You can delete me, Otto, but you can't delete what I've taught you. When Otto awoke, he was on the floor of his lab, drenched in sweat, his hands shaking. The neural purge had succeeded. The readings confirmed it. Peter Parker's consciousness was gone. Otto stood slowly, breathing hard, staring at the screens filled with perfect silent data. It's over, he said aloud, though the words felt hollow. I am free. But the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was emptiness. He tried to celebrate his victory. He told himself he had eliminated distraction, purified the mind. But when he patrolled that night, swinging through the city's cold wind, something was missing. The world felt flatter, the lights dimmer, the air heavier. For the first time, he felt truly alone inside Peter Parker's body. He landed on a rooftop overlooking Queens, Peter's old neighborhood. Below, families moved through warm windows, laughter spilling into the night. Otto watched them with a heaviness he didn't understand. He remembered being mocked as a child, being called a freak, being alone, but now he had everything: power, respect, intellect, and still he felt that same loneliness. For a moment, he wondered if this was what Peter had felt every day, carrying the burden of being Spider Man. The city stretched before him, endless and unknowable. You were weak, Otto whispered, but you were never empty. He didn't know why he said it. Perhaps it was a confession. Perhaps it was grief. He turned away and swung into the night, his movements sharp and mechanical, every motion efficient, flawless, and joyless. He told himself this was what superiority felt like: silence, solitude, victory. But somewhere, buried deep within the neural code of his mind, a single memory flickered: a voice, gentle and familiar, whispering not as an enemy, but as a friend. "I'm still here, Otto." And though he would never admit it, the superior Spider Man smiled. Chapter 8: The Man Who Loved. For all his genius, Otto Octavius had never truly understood love. He could describe its chemistry, analyze its patterns in neural response, define it in scientific terms: dopamine, oxytocin, irrational chemical dependency, but he had never felt it. Love was chaos disguised as connection, a variable he had no use for, or at least that was what he believed until he met Anna Maria Marconi. She was not extraordinary by the standards of his ego. She wasn't a supermodel, a genius on his level, or a celebrity scientist. She was small in stature, brilliant in thought, and disarmingly kind. A physicist and tutor who saw the world not through equations or power, but through wonder. She taught at Empire State University, where Otto, still wearing the face and name of Peter Parker, had re-enrolled to maintain his cover. What began as a calculated disguise became, slowly and against his will, something real. Their first conversation had been trivial. She was explaining the nuances of quantum tunneling, and Otto, naturally, corrected her mid-sentence. She laughed, not with mockery but delight. "You're right," she said. "You remind me of me." No one had ever said that to Otto Octavius before. Not as Peter, not as himself. For a man who had built his identity on being the smartest person in the room, it was unnerving to find someone who met him not with competition, but curiosity. Over time, Otto found himself seeking her company without realizing why. He admired her mind first, the sharpness of her thought, the elegance of her reasoning, but it was her gentleness that disarmed him. She listened when he spoke, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. When he corrected her, she smiled instead of bristling. When he bragged, she laughed instead of judging. And when she looked at him, it wasn't through the lens of Peter Parker's past or Spider Man's shadow. She saw a man. Otto had spent his entire life either worshipped for his intellect or hated for his arrogance. Anna Maria saw neither the hero nor the monster, only the human being behind the armor. He didn't know how to process it. At first, he rationalized his fascination as strategic, maintaining Peter's relationships, blending into his life. But when he found himself replaying their conversations in his head, analyzing the way her eyes brightened when she spoke about her students, he began to realize that the calculations didn't add up. Love, he discovered, was the one formula that defied precision. Their relationship unfolded quietly. Dinners became routine, walks replaced patrols. For a few hours each evening, Otto, the man who had fought gods, built armies, and stolen another man's life, allowed himself to simply exist. They discussed science, philosophy, literature. He quoted Oppenheimer, she quoted Shakespeare. Sometimes she teased him for being too dramatic. "You have this way of talking," she said once, smiling. "Like every sentence needs to change the world." He looked at her for a long time and replied softly, "Maybe it already did." In her company, the arrogance that had defined Otto Octavius softened into something like humility. He still carried himself with pride, but it was no longer armor. It was confidence tempered by care. For the first time since his transformation, he stopped thinking about Peter Parker. The ghost that had haunted him for months grew quiet, almost at peace. It wasn't that Peter was gone, it was that Otto had begun to live a life Peter himself would have approved of, one grounded not in superiority, but in connection. Anna Maria was perceptive. She noticed the changes in him, the sudden warmth, the careful choice of words, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. "You're different, Peter," she said one evening over dinner. "More centered, more honest." Otto hesitated. "Perhaps," he said. "Perhaps I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be." He meant it. For once, he wasn't pretending. But love is never simple. It exposes what we hide from ourselves. And Otto, for all his new-found tenderness, could not escape the truth of what he was. Every act of affection carried the weight of deceit. Every smile was borrowed. Every heartbeat that quickened in Anna's presence belonged to a body that wasn't his. He told himself it didn't matter, that love was chemistry, not identity. But when Anna took his hand one evening and said, "I'm glad you're here, Peter," the illusion cracked. The guilt he'd buried beneath data and victories resurfaced. He wasn't Peter. He was the man who had killed him. That night, he stood on the roof of his apartment watching the city lights. The air was cold, and the hum of traffic below sounded like a pulse, the heartbeat of a world that had no idea who was protecting it. He thought of Anna's smile, of the warmth he didn't deserve, of the life he was living on borrowed time. "She deserves better," he whispered to the night. From deep within his mind, a voice answered, faint, forgiving, "Then be better." It startled him. Peter's voice hadn't spoken in weeks, not since the mental purge. For a moment, Otto thought he was hallucinating. But the words echoed with familiarity, like a hand placed gently on his shoulder. "Be better." Otto looked down at the city, his city, and for the first time he didn't feel superior. He felt responsible. His work changed after that. He began to focus less on dominance and more on efficiency through compassion. He saved without spectacle, fixed what could be fixed, and forgave what could be forgiven. He even spared a criminal who once served him, telling the man to leave New York and start over. The man did. And later, Otto would see his name in the paper, credited with rescuing children from a fire. It was a small thing, but it mattered. When Anna asked him one evening why he seemed different, he smiled faintly. "Perhaps I've realized that intelligence without empathy is just another form of blindness." She laughed softly. "Now that sounds like something Peter Parker would say." Otto didn't correct her. He didn't need to. He loved her quietly, without confession, without expectation. She represented the one thing his genius could never build, a future worth protecting. And though she would never know the truth, Otto knew that through her he had touched something Peter Parker had always understood instinctively. Love was not a weakness to overcome. It was the proof that even the worst among us could change. For a man who had once sought to conquer the world, that realization was enough. The superior Spider-Man was still watching over New York, still orchestrating perfection, still standing as its self-appointed guardian. But now, when he looked down from the rooftops, the city seemed less like a system to control and more like a heartbeat to listen to. And in that quiet rhythm, in the pulse of life beneath him, Otto Octavius finally felt something he hadn't known in years: peace. Chapter 9: The Rise of the Spider. Army love had softened him, but it hadn't cured him. Otto Octavius was not a man who understood balance. Every emotion, every conviction in his mind eventually calcified into obsession. Compassion, like ambition, became a tool for control. After months of peace and efficiency, the superior Spider Man convinced himself that the next logical step in evolution was scale. He could not be everywhere at once, but his machines could. His methods worked because he was precise. But what if precision could be multiplied? What if the entire city could think as he did, move as he commanded? That was how it began, not with tyranny, but with logic. Spider Island 2 became a hive of creation. Otto's sleepless mind designed, optimized, and deployed. The spider bots that once acted as eyes became limbs, an extension of his will. He modified them to apprehend criminals directly, to enforce his laws in real time. Drones patrolled the skyline, surveillance nodes mapped heat signatures and conversations, and spider tracers turned every street into a monitored artery of the metropolis. The city was a living organism now, and Otto its brain. No crime, no chaos, he whispered as he watched the screens glow. Perfect order. The media called it a miracle. Crime rates plummeted again, lower than ever recorded. Drug rings vanished. Gangs scattered. For the first time in decades, New Yorkers could walk home at night without fear. Mothers whispered prayers of gratitude to Spider Man. The mayor publicly praised his efficiency, calling him a model for justice in the 21st century. Even J. Jonah Jameson, who had built a career on vilifying Spider Man, gave him his blessing. And something more. During a public ceremony, Jameson handed Otto the symbolic key to the city. You've earned it, Jameson said. You're not the menace I thought you were. You're the hero this city deserves. The cameras flashed, the crowd roared, and Otto stood on stage smiling with Peter Parker's borrowed mouth. A man applauded for being everything he once despised. But beneath the applause, something rotten was growing. Otto's army of machines did not distinguish intent from threat. His algorithms measured risk, not morality. When a teenager vandalized a subway wall with graffiti, spider bots descended and restrained him as if he were an armed terrorist. When an innocent man reached for his wallet too quickly during a police encounter, Otto's drones intervened, misreading the gesture as violence. The city's peace was built on fear, and Otto mistook fear for order. The Avengers noticed. Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor confronted him atop Avengers Tower after a series of misunderstandings left several civilians injured. Spider-Man, Cap began, his tone weary but firm. This isn't you. You're running a surveillance state. You're not saving people. You're policing them. Otto crossed his arms. I am ensuring their safety through superior methodology. You should be thanking me. Tony Stark scoffed. Superior methodology? You've built Skynet with a web logo. Otto's eyes narrowed. Your arrogance blinds you, Stark. My system works. Thor's hammer struck the floor with a thunderclap. A kingdom built on fear is no kingdom at all, the god said. Otto's reply was sharp, precise, and cruel. And yet, fear keeps it safe. They debated, argued, threatened. Otto walked away. You're relics of a chaotic past, he said. I am the future. The Avengers considered detaining him. They didn't. They still believed this was Peter Parker. Misguided, perhaps traumatized, but redeemable. They didn't see Otto Octavius behind the mask, tightening his web around the world. At Horizon Labs, his colleagues began to question his behavior. He dismissed them one by one, cutting ties, taking control of patents and security systems. Anna Maria, though, remained close. She saw the growing tension in his face, the way his eyes darted toward the window as if he were watching a city that might slip away. Peter, she said one evening, you're working too hard. You can't control everything. He froze, looking at her as if she'd spoken a forbidden truth. Control, he said slowly, is the only thing keeping them alive. She frowned. And what's keeping you alive? He had no answer. That night, he dreamed of webs, not the soft, glistening lines of a spider's creation, but cold, metallic wires stretching across the city, binding buildings, streets, and people. He stood in the center, every strand connected to his hands. When he moved, they moved. When he breathed, they obeyed. And when he looked closer, he saw faces caught within, strangers, friends, even Anna Maria. He woke gasping. For the first time in years, Otto Octavius felt fear, not of failure, but of success. Still, he pressed on. The spider patrol expanded. Volunteers joined, trained, wore uniforms bearing his insignia. He called them the Spiderlings, men and women dedicated to maintaining the peace. But their loyalty wasn't to justice, it was to him. The superior Spider-Man had built an army, not of soldiers, but of believers. When the Green Goblin began to rise again, it started as a whisper through his network. Encrypted signals, corrupted spider bots, hidden messages in the data stream. Otto ignored them. Residual interference, he muttered. A statistical anomaly. But deep down, Peter's old instincts stirred within him. You're missing something, the ghost of Peter's voice whispered faintly from the edges of his consciousness. Otto dismissed it, his ego louder than his doubt. No flaw exists in my system, he told himself. Only resistance. And resistance was something he could crush. Weeks later, he stood atop the Empire State Building, watching his spiderlings march through the Somme. Streets below, the city gleamed under artificial light, every street monitored, every voice recorded, every threat neutralized. Perfection, he whispered, but the word tasted hollow. Behind his eyes, a faint tremor of memory surfaced. Uncle Ben's voice saying something simple. You can't protect people from everything, Peter. You just do your best and trust them to do the rest. Otto blinked hard, pushing the thought away. No, he muttered. That was weakness. But his voice shook when he said it. Below, in the dark alleys beyond his patrol routes, a different light flickered. Green, cruel, and patient. Norman Osborn had returned, hidden within Otto's perfect system, building an army of his own. The goblin's laughter echoed faintly through corrupted circuits, unheard by Otto but carried through his network like poison. Let him build his web, the goblin said to his followers. The higher he climbs, the harder he'll fall. And above it all, Otto Octavius, the man who believed he had conquered chaos, watched his empire spread beneath him, unaware that the ghosts of his past were waiting, sharpening their claws on the wires of his illusion. The city was his, for now. Chapter 10. The Green Goblin's Return. Perfection doesn't collapse in an instant. It decays quietly from the inside out. Otto Octavius, in all his brilliance, had built a flawless web around New York. But even the strongest web can be poisoned if the spider cannot see the infection. The first signs were subtle, brief glitches in his surveillance feed, spider bots failing to respond to commands, sections of the city blinking offline for seconds at a time. He blamed the usual culprits: interference, hardware fatigue, atmospheric noise. But in the depths of the network, beneath layers of code Otto believed unbreakable, something alive had taken root. Lines of green code pulsed like veins. The screens flickered, and somewhere within the static, a familiar voice laughed. Norman Osborn was dead, at least. That's what Otto believed. But death, for men like Osborn, was never permanent. The Green Goblin had learned to survive through corruption, through infection, through the very chaos Otto believed he had conquered. He didn't need to attack Otto's army, he only needed to whisper into it. Otto's spider bots, once his eyes, began lying to him. They falsified data, hid movements, altered feeds. The goblin's touch spread like a virus, renaming itself goblin protocols deep within Otto's systems. One by one, his machines turned against him, not openly but quietly, like servants mocking their master when his back is turned. The first confrontation was almost cinematic. Otto was patrolling Brooklyn when an explosion shattered the calm. He arrived within seconds, webbing through the smoke, but the scene was wrong. No enemies, no chaos, just a burning message scorched across a rooftop. Three words, glowing in chemical green. You missed me. For a man who lived by logic, fear felt alien, but Otto felt it then, deep, heavy, unmistakable. He scanned the area, deploying drones, tracking radiation signatures. Nothing. The Green Goblin was a ghost in the code. He returned to Spider Island too and began analyzing every byte, every signal, every trace of deviation. His algorithms came back clean. The goblin had erased his footprints perfectly. Otto slammed his fist against the console, sparks flying. Impossible, he hissed. No one outsmarts me. But he wasn't being outsmarted. He was being understood. Norman Osborn had always known how Otto thought. Every pride, every insecurity, every blind spot. He didn't need to destroy the system. He only needed Otto to doubt it. That was the first crack. Otto began second guessing his readings, double checking his data, losing sleep. His perfection, once mechanical, began to fray. Anna Maria noticed. You're distracted, she said one evening, touching his hand. You're somewhere else lately. Otto looked at her and saw for the first time how fear looked when reflected in someone else's eyes. I'm fine, he lied. Just work. She smiled softly. Then stopped working for one night. He wanted to. He couldn't. The goblin's attacks escalated. His forces, a resurrected Goblin Nation, struck at warehouses, labs, and power grids. But every time Otto responded, he arrived seconds too late. It was as if his own system was predicting his moves and using them against him. He began to realize the horrifying truth. Norman Osborn was inside his network, inside his machines, inside his city. In desperation, Otto tried to isolate the corrupted segments. He shut down whole district surveillance, cutting communication between spider bots and command. For the first time in months, sections of New York went dark. The city that once sang under his control now pulsed with silence. Panic spread. Crime, long suppressed by fear, returned with ferocity. The people began to question their savior. Where's Spider Man? The headlines asked. Where is our protector? Osborn answered for him. The Green Goblin emerged not in the shadows, but in full view. His army flooded the streets, men and women painted in his colors, wearing modified versions of Otto's own technology. They called themselves the Goblin Nation. They attacked spider patrol stations, raided supply depots, and spread his symbol, a jagged, glowing grin, across the city. Every explosion, every riot, every scream echoed through Otto's failure. His network, once his strength, had become the goblin's playground. Otto tried to rally his forces. He stood before his remaining spiderlings in the command center, mask off, voice steady. We will not lose this city, he declared. We will adapt, rebuild, and strike back. His soldiers cheered, but their eyes betrayed them. They didn't understand the war they were fighting. A war not of bullets, but of systems, of minds. That night, Otto tracked a signal to the sewers, a forgotten part of his network. The tunnels were dark, humid, crawling with corrupted spider bots whose eyes glowed green. At the center, surrounded by the whirring of machinery, stood the Green Goblin. The sight stopped Otto cold. Norman's face was unrecognizable, half masked, scarred, his grin carved by madness and triumph. Doctor, he said mockingly, or should I say Peter, You've done so well pretending to be someone else. Otto raised his web shooters, fury rising. You're a parasite, Osborne, feeding on the brilliance of greater men. Norman laughed. Brilliance? You've built a cage and called it salvation. You turned Spider-Man into your puppet, and still you're losing. He gestured to the walls. Screens flickered to life, showing chaos across the city. Fires burned. The police were overwhelmed. Spider bots fought each other like insects tearing their own web apart. You wanted control, Norman continued. Now look at what control gets you. Otto lunged. Their fight was brutal. Web against blades, science against madness. But the goblin's words cut deeper than his bombs. You'll never be Spider-Man, he hissed. You're just Otto Octavius in someone else's skin, a thief pretending to be a hero. The words struck like a nerve. Otto froze for half a second, just enough time for Norman to vanish into the smoke, his laughter echoing through the tunnels. Otto collapsed to his knees, gasping, surrounded by his own ruined machines. He had built perfection, and perfection had betrayed him. The irony was unbearable. No, he whispered, not again. When he returned to Anna Maria that night, his mask hung loosely in his hands. Everything I've built, he said softly, is crumbling. She looked at him, unafraid, and asked a question no one ever had. Then what are you going to build next? Otto stared at her, lost for words. For the first time, he didn't have a plan. Outside, the Goblin Nation spread unchecked, and New York trembled under the weight of chaos. The era of the superior Spider-Man was breaking apart, and somewhere, buried deep within Otto's mind, a faint, familiar voice stirred once more, weak but alive. You can still fix this, Otto. He closed his eyes. No, Parker, he whispered. We can. Chapter 11. Goblin Nation. The city burned. From the Bronx to the Battery, New York was an inferno of panic and green fire. Every street, every shadow carried the mark of the goblin. The jagged smile of Norman Osborn spread like a virus through Otto Octavius's perfect web. The once orderly hum of spider bots had turned to chaos. Their red eyes glowed green, enslaved by the goblin protocols. Where Otto had built symmetry, the goblin had unleashed madness. The irony was almost poetic. The man who sought to control everything now watched as his creation devoured itself. He stood atop a building in Midtown, the smoke rising below him like a monument to his arrogance. The city's sirens wailed endlessly. The air was filled with screams, explosions, and the mechanical screech of corrupted spider bots turning on civilians. Otto's surveillance network was useless. The screens at Spider Island flickered between static and cruel laughter. The words Goblin Nation rises pulsed across his monitors like a heartbeat. No, Otto muttered, clutching his head. This cannot be happening. But it was. The Goblin's army moved with frightening coordination, using Otto's own systems to strike precisely where his spiderlings weren't. Power grids failed in waves, plunging neighborhoods into darkness. Bridges were sabotaged, trapping thousands. Hospitals were raided for supplies. Every move Otto had once used to maintain control was now turned against him. The city that had once knelt before its superior Spider-Man was learning what it meant to live without him, and they were terrified. He tried to fight back. Every instinct told him to reassert control, to rebuild order through calculation. He rallied his spiderlings, coordinating what forces remained. We will reclaim the city street by street, he shouted through comms. But the soldiers hesitated. Morale had evaporated. They had followed him out of faith, and now faith had burned to ash. Sir, one of them said quietly, we don't even know who we're fighting for anymore. The words cut deeper than any weapon. Otto went alone. He patrolled the streets, swinging through fire and smoke, saving who he could. For every person he rescued, 10 more cried out somewhere else. The algorithms couldn't process chaos. There was no pattern to predict, no system to manage. The goblin didn't follow rules. He broke them. That was his genius. That was his revenge. One night, while rescuing a group of civilians from a collapsing tenement, Otto found himself face to face with a familiar figure. Carly Cooper, Peter Parker's old ally and former lover. She looked at him with eyes full of fury and recognition. I know who you are, she said. You're not Peter. Otto froze, stunned. You don't understand. No, she cut him off, voice trembling. I do. You're Otto Octavius. You think you can just steal his life and make it better. But look around you. This is what your superiority brings. Her words struck like lightning. Otto had always dismissed critics as lesser minds, but this time the truth hurt because it came from someone Peter had loved, someone who could see through the illusion. You've doomed us all, she whispered before turning away, vanishing into the chaos. For the first time since taking Peter's body, Otto felt the full weight of his lie. At Horizon Labs, he tried desperately to salvage what remained of his systems. The Goblin's virus had rooted itself deep within his neural codes, in the very architecture of the network Otto had designed. Every attempt to purge it failed. He tore at his own machinery, sparks flying. No one outsmarts Otto Octavius, he screamed, smashing a console to pieces. But the laughter that answered him wasn't his own. On every screen, the green goblin appeared, grinning, triumphant, alive. Oh, but you've made it so easy, my dear doctor, Norman said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. You wanted a kingdom, and I've simply taken it from you. Tell me, how does it feel to be outdone by chaos? Otto clenched his fists, shaking. You're nothing but a relic of insanity, Osborne. I will burn you out of my city. The goblin chuckled. Your city. Don't you mean his? And with that, the screens went dark. The word his lingered in Otto's mind long after the transmission ended. Peter's city, Peter's people, Peter's name. Everything Otto had built, every victory, every sacrifice, was a monument to a man he had stolen from. And now, that monument was burning. Anna Maria found him in his lap hours later, surrounded by broken equipment, his hands shaking. Peter, she said softly, unaware of the truth, you can't save everyone. Otto looked up, eyes hollow. You sound like him, he whispered. Like who? She asked. He didn't answer. When she left, Otto turned to the shattered glass of a computer screen. His reflection was fractured. Peter's face split into 100 pieces, each showing a different emotion: anger, guilt, exhaustion. For the first time, Otto didn't see himself as superior. He saw himself as small. And then a sound, faint, distant, impossible. A heartbeat, not his own, a memory. He closed his eyes and the voice came, soft, gentle, familiar. You can't fix everything, Otto, but you can start with one thing. Peter Parker's consciousness, buried deep, flickered back to life. Otto gasped, stumbling backward. No, he whispered. You were gone. I purged you. You thought you did, Peter's voice replied. But you can't erase what's right. The war outside raged on, but inside Otto's mind a new one began. Not between enemies, but between two men who finally understood each other. For the first time, Otto didn't resist. He didn't shout. He listened. Tell me, he whispered. Tell me what to do. Save them, Peter said. Simply, and for the first time since becoming Spider-Man, Otto didn't feel superior. He felt human. Chapter 12: The Final Choice. There are moments in a man's life when genius and pride collapse beneath the weight of truth. For Otto Octavius, that moment came in the ruins of his own perfection. New York was dying. The Goblin Nation had consumed everything he built, every system, every plan, every illusion of control. The streets he once ruled were chaos incarnate. The skyline he once protected was fire and smoke. Spider bots fought each other in the air like mechanical locusts, their corrupted circuits glowing green. The sound of sirens was endless, blending with screams and laughter that echoed from the city's broken heart. For all his intellect, for all his superiority, Otto could not stop it. And worse, he finally understood why. The goblin's voice haunted the calms, his laughter infecting every channel. You wanted order, doctor, he taunted, and all you built was a cage for yourself. Otto ignored him, webbing through the burning city, his lungs aching beneath the smoke. He had one goal left: find Anna Maria. The goblin knew who she was. He had always known. Otto reached her apartment, heart pounding, and found it in ruins. Flames licked the walls. Anna! He shouted, searching through the wreckage. From the smoke, she emerged, coughing, covered in ash, terrified but alive. Peter! She cried, rushing to him. He grabbed her hand, trembling. We must go. Now. But before they could escape, the wall exploded inward. Norman Osborn stood in the doorway, silhouetted by fire, his armor gleaming like a nightmare reborn. How touching, the goblin sneered. A monster pretending to care. Otto's grip tightened around Anna's hand. Leave her out of this, he growled. Norman laughed. You don't get to give orders, Octavius. You've been playing hero, but you and I, we're the same. We take what we want. We build empires. And when they fall, we start again. Otto lunged. Their fight tore through the apartment, shattering glass and hurling debris. Norman was faster than he remembered, his madness sharpened by purpose. Otto fought with desperation, not calculation. Every strike was fueled by fear, not for himself, but for Anna. She screamed as the floor collapsed beneath them. Otto caught her mid-fall, webbing her to safety. Go, he shouted. She hesitated, tears in her eyes. Peter, please, go, he roared. And then the goblin hit him from behind, sending them both crashing into the street below. They landed hard, surrounded by flames and chaos. Norman stood over him, laughing. You think you can protect her? You can't even protect yourself. He grabbed Otto by the throat, lifting him effortlessly. Do you know what the funniest part is, Doctor? You've spent all this time pretending to be a hero, and you almost fooled yourself. Otto's vision blurred. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. For a moment, he saw flashes. Aunt May's smile, Anna's laughter. Peter's friends, the city's skyline at sunset. He had stolen all of it. He had lived a life that wasn't his. He had tried to prove he was better, and in the process lost everything that made Spider-Man who he was. You're right, Otto whispered through blood and smoke. I'm not a hero. He slammed his gauntlet against his wrist console, triggering a burst of light that blinded the goblin. But I know one. He fled, wounded, webbing through the city with the last of his strength. He didn't return to Spider Island too. He went to Parker Industries, Peter's old workspace. The machine still hummed with dormant data, the faint ghosts of a life once lived. He sat at the terminal, breathing heavily, his hands shaking. Parker, he said aloud, you were right. You always were. Inside his mind, Peter's presence stirred, faint but steady. Otto. I can't stop him, Otto admitted. Not like this. He knows me too well. But he doesn't know you. You don't have to do this, Peter's voice said. You can still fight. Otto laughed weakly. I've been fighting all my life. For recognition, for control, for superiority. And for what? To build a world that falls apart the moment I stop holding it together. He stared at his reflection in the shattered monitor. Peter's face, tired and human. You're the one who truly deserves this life. The power, the name, the love. You're Spider-Man, Peter. I never was. There was silence, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath. Then Peter spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. If you give me back control, Otto, you will die? Otto finished. Yes. but for once it will mean something. He activated the neural interface. The machine came alive, beams of light spreading across the room. His memories flashed before him. Childhood humiliation, scientific triumph, villainy, failure, redemption. Anna's face lingered last, her smile soft and kind. Tell her, he whispered, that I tried. Peter's voice trembled. You're doing the right thing. Otto closed his eyes. I finally understand what that means. The transfer began. Circuits flared, neurons rewrote themselves, consciousness shifted. Otto felt himself unravel, piece by piece, thought by thought, dissolving into memory. For the first time, there was no fear, only peace. You'll make it right, won't you? He whispered. I promise, Peter said. And then darkness. When the light faded, Peter Parker gasped awake, truly awake, in his own body. He staggered to his feet, clutching his chest, disoriented but alive. The world around him burned, but for the first time in months he could feel everything, the responsibility, the pain, the hope. I'm back, he whispered. Let's finish this. Deep within the neural code where Otto's mind once existed, a final memory lingered, a quiet voice echoing into eternity. You were right, Parker. To be superior, you must first learn to be good. Chapter 13. The Return of Peter Parker. The city was on fire. The night sky glowed an eerie shade of green, painted by the flames that danced across the rooftops. Smokes curled like ghosts over the horizon, and in its shadows the last fragments of Otto Octavius's reign burned away. The spider bots, corrupted beyond saving, fell from the air in waves, their mechanical carcasses crashing onto empty streets. The Goblin Nation roamed through the ruins, celebrating their victory with screams and laughter. Chaos reigned, and then, amid the noise, a heartbeat returned. Peter Parker opened his eyes. For a moment he didn't move. The world felt strange, heavier, sharper, alive in ways he hadn't felt in months. Every breath carried the scent of smoke and ash. Every heartbeat echoed in his ears like a drum. He raised his hand, staring at it, flexing his fingers slowly. They trembled, but they were his. The weight of what had happened settled in like a cold wind through his bones. Otto was gone. The mind that had stolen his life, his memories, his face, had given them back. And not out of weakness, out of choice. Peter stood, swaying slightly, and caught sight of his reflection in a cracked mirror. His mask was torn, the familiar red and blue scorched and dirty. Behind the mask, his eyes looked older, not from time, but from what they had seen. He remembered everything: Otto's arrogance, his cruelty, his brilliance, his final act of sacrifice. Peter pressed a hand to his chest, whispering softly, You did it, Otto. You really did it. But there was no time to mourn. The goblin still lived, and somewhere in the chaos of fire and steel, Anna Maria was trapped. Peter launched himself into the air, the web line snapping from his wrist with a familiar, perfect rhythm. The city rushed beneath him, bridges collapsing, sirens wailing, explosions lighting up the night like a heartbeat gone mad. But even in ruin, New York still looked beautiful to him. It always had. It was the city that raised him, tested him, broke him, and made him Spider-Man. And tonight it needed him more than ever. He swung through the smoke, memory guiding instinct. Every move was muscle memory, every turn familiar. He wasn't Otto's ghost piloting a machine anymore. He was himself again, flawed, human, alive. He found Anna Maria cornered in the remains of a skyscraper, surrounded by goblin soldiers. She was shouting for Peter, unaware that the man she loved had already died to save her. Peter landed between her and the attackers, webbing them to the walls in a blur. She froze, staring. Peter, she whispered. He hesitated, voice low. I'm here. He couldn't tell her the truth, not yet. There would be time for grief later. Before she could speak, a green explosion tore through the room. Norman Osborn stepped from the smoke, armor cracked, face half lit by fire. His grin was carved from madness. You again, the goblin snarled. I kill you, you come back. Maybe I should start charging rent. Peter stood firm. You should have stayed in the shadows, Norman. The goblin laughed, wild and cruel. And miss this? No, Parker. This is your masterpiece, your city burning, your legacy in ashes. Peter didn't answer. He moved first. The fight was brutal, personal, not between hero and villain, but between two men bound by hatred and history. Every punch echoed with years of failure and loss. Norman fought like chaos incarnate, unpredictable and savage. Peter fought like a man who'd lost everything but his purpose. They crashed through walls, tore through steel, and fell from the sky into the burning streets below. The goblin lunged, slashing wildly. You think you're better than him? Than Octavius? Peter dodged, countering with a burst of webbing that pinned Norman's arm. No, he said through gritted teeth. I'm not better. I'm just me. He pulled, webbing snapping tight, slamming the goblin into the side of a bus. The villain laughed, even as he bled. And where did that get you? Everyone you love. Gone. The girl? She'll find out who you really are. The city? It'll hate you again by morning. You don't win, Parker. You just survive. Peter's fists clenched. The temptation was there to hit harder, to end it the way Otto would have. But then he remembered Otto's final words. To be superior, you must first learn to be good. He took a breath, stepped back, and spoke softly. You're right, Norman. I don't win, but I never stop. He whipped the goblin to the ground, leaving him for the authorities. That's the difference between you and me. The sirens grew louder as police arrived. Peter turned away, watching the sun rise faintly through the smoke. New York was scarred, but alive. He could rebuild it, not as the superior Spider-Man, but as himself. He looked down at his torn gloves, his bruised hands, and smiled faintly. Guess it's back to the basics, he whispered. Later, he stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the city. The wind was cold, carrying the faint smell of burnt metal and ozone. He thought of Otto, the man who had stolen his life, lived it better in some ways, and died trying to make it right. For all his sins, Otto had understood something in the end. Greatness without compassion is hollow. Peter looked up at the sky, whispering, "Thank you, Otto." Below, the city stirred. The fires dimmed, the sirens faded, and dawn painted the skyline in pale gold. Spider-Man crouched on the edge of the rooftop, the morning breeze tugging at his mask. The world would never know what had happened, how close they had come to losing everything, how much one broken man had sacrificed to save it. But Peter knew, and that was enough. He leapt into the light, swinging forward, the sound of his web shooters cutting through the morning air. New York had its hero back, and though no one would ever see him. Again, somewhere deep within Peter's mind, where memory becomes something more, Otto Octavius watched quietly and smiled. Chapter 14: Legacy of the Superior. The fire had died, but its echo remained. In the days after the goblin's fall, the smoke lifted from the city like a curtain after the final act of a play, revealing not victory, but aftermath. The streets were scarred, buildings hollowed, and people walked with that quiet look that follows survival, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Spider-Man was back, but New York had changed, and so had he. Peter Parker had always carried weight on his shoulders, guilt, responsibility, the ghosts of those he couldn't save, but this was different. Otto Octavius's shadow lingered in his every movement, a haunting presence that wasn't malevolent anymore, but formative. Every time Peter fixed a circuit, recalibrated a web shooter, or traced a criminal network with surgical precision, he saw Otto's influence. For months, Otto had been him, not pretending, but living as him. He had made choices Peter never would have dared to make. He had crossed lines, yes, but he had also pushed limits Peter had never tested. Now, standing on a rooftop overlooking a rebuilding city, Peter felt the ghost of Otto's mind flicker behind his thoughts, like static. It wasn't consciousness. Otto was gone, truly gone. But his imprint remained. 1,000 little habits, phrases, techniques. When Peter analyzed data, his fingers still typed like Otto's. When he fought, he sometimes found himself anticipating moves before his instincts caught up, an echo of Otto's precision. It was unsettling at first. Then it became a reminder. Otto Octavius had wanted to be superior. In the end, what he became was human. Peter visited the Horizon Labs, or what remained of it. The building had been evacuated during the Goblin siege, much of its equipment destroyed or repurposed by Otto during his reign. As he walked through the empty corridors, his footsteps echoed against the walls. He found one of Otto's old workstations still intact. Blueprints littered the desk, sketches of prosthetics, neural interfaces, even medical technologies that could have changed lives. They weren't weapons, they were solutions. Otto had been working on these before the goblins' attack. Peter picked up one of the pages, staring at the handwriting, sharp, deliberate, proud. He smiled sadly. You were trying, weren't you? Later that day, he met with Anna Maria Marconi. She looked smaller than he remembered, her usual warmth dimmed by grief. When she saw him, she smiled weakly. You're alive, she said softly. He nodded. Yeah. She hesitated, searching his face. You're different. He looked away. I've been through a lot. She studied him for a long moment, and then, almost whispering, said, So has he. Peter froze. She didn't know everything, not yet, but she felt it. The man she had loved wasn't the same Peter Parker standing before her now, and somehow she wasn't angry. She was just sad. Before she left, she placed a small notebook in his hand. He left this, she said. Peter opened it. Inside were equations, notes on improving prosthetics, ideas for sustainable energy, all written in Otto's steady, meticulous script. On the last page was a single line. To build something that lasts, you must first learn how to let go. Peter closed the notebook gently, as if it were fragile. Thank you, he said. That night, Peter returned to the rooftops. The city lights shimmered below, alive again, defiant as ever. He perched on the edge of a ledge, the wind cold against his mask, and let himself breathe. Every shadow reminded him of Otto's time in his body, the victories, the failures, the arrogance, the redemption. For all his sins, Otto had done something Peter couldn't ignore. He made the world safer. He built systems that worked, saved lives Peter never knew about, and in his final act sacrificed everything to make things right. Peter thought of that moment, Otto's voice fading in his mind, the quiet acceptance in his tone. You'll make it right, won't you? Peter whispered into the wind. I'm trying. He knew he could never erase what Otto had done. There would always be scars, both in the city and in himself, but scars aren't weaknesses. They're the proof of healing. Otto had left him more than guilt. He had left him perspective. For all his mistakes, the doctor had reminded Peter of something he'd forgotten in his endless pursuit of responsibility. To be Spider-Man was not just to endure suffering, but to rise from it. Every time, no matter how deep the fall. As dawn broke, Peter swung through the city, feeling the rhythm return to his movements. Fluid, instinctive, alive. The people below looked up, some cheering, others simply watching in quiet awe. They didn't know who he really was or what he had gone through. But that was fine. Being Spider-Man had never been about recognition. He landed on a construction beam high above Manhattan, the rising sun casting gold across the skyline. The air smelled clean again. The wind carried faint echoes, not words, but presence. Somewhere in that quiet space between thought and memory, Otto Octavius was gone. And yet, Peter felt him there, not as a ghost, but as a shadow that had finally learned how to fade. He smiled beneath the mask. "Rest easy, Doc," he said. "You did good in the end." The web shooters clicked, and Spider-Man leapt into the morning, the city stretching endlessly before him. Rebuilt, reborn, ready. And far below, the streets hummed with life once more, as if even New York itself was whispering the same thing Peter felt in his heart. You can fall, you can fail, you can break, but you can always rise again. Chapter 15. The Echo of Greatness. Time softens everything, even ghosts. Months had passed since the night the city burned, since the Goblin fell and Otto Octavius vanished into memory. New York had rebuilt itself the way it always did, with noise and defiance covering its scars in glass and motion. The people had moved on. They didn't speak of the Spider-Man who ruled like a scientist or the army of machines that watched their streets. They only remembered that somehow they survived. That was how the city loved its heroes. Fiercely, briefly, and then with silence. For Peter Parker, silence had become his companion. He moved through his days with a quiet grace now, more deliberate, less frantic. He still woke before dawn, still mended his suit, still leapt from the rooftops when the sirens called. But the city felt different beneath his hands. It wasn't chaos anymore. It was rhythm, a heartbeat steady and familiar, but changed. He'd spent years thinking Spider-Man was just responsibility wrapped in pain. Otto had shown him another side, control, purpose, precision. And though that control had consumed its creator, Peter couldn't deny what it had taught him. Otto's ghost lingered in the smallest things, the improved algorithms in his web shooters, the new patterns in his patrols, the way he thought before he struck. Otto had left fingerprints all over the life he returned. One night, after a long patrol, Peter landed on a building overlooking the East River. The moon hung low, white and thin, painting the water in silver lines. He sat there for a while, mask off, the wind threading through his hair. From here, the city didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a miracle. "You'd like this view," he murmured. "You'd probably call it inefficient, too many reflective surfaces." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile born from sadness that no longer hurts. "But it's beautiful, Otto. You just never looked long enough to see it." He thought of Anna Maria often. She had never learned the full truth, not officially. Peter had told her part of it, just enough to make sense of what had happened, but not enough to break her heart again. She had left New York eventually, taking Otto's unfinished work with her, his designs, his theories, his dream of a better world. Sometimes Peter received updates from her, a breakthrough in prosthetics, a foundation named in Otto's memory. She never said his name, but Peter always knew who she meant, the man who tried. Peter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. Otto's notebook, the one Anna Maria had given him. The pages were worn, corners bent from being opened too many times. On the last page, he traced the words Otto had written before his end. To build something that lasts, you must first learn how to let go. He had never understood those words fully until now. Otto had spent his entire life grasping for recognition, for control, for superiority. He had stolen a life, built an empire, and tried to shape the world into something perfect. But in the end, the only moment that truly defined him was the one where he let go. In surrendering Peter's body, Otto had found what he had always sought, meaning. Peter stood, looking out over the city. You got your wish, Doc, he said softly. You were superior, just not in the way you thought. The wind picked up, carrying the sounds of New York. Laughter, engines, sirens, life. He pulled his mask back on, the familiar fabric settling against his skin. He could feel Otto's presence fade a little more each day, not in loss, but in completion. Otto Octavius wasn't haunting him anymore. He was part of him, a quiet echo of greatness that reminded Peter that even the worst of men could choose redemption. As dawn began to rise, painting the sky in pale orange, Spider-Man leapt into the air. The city caught him like it always did, wind roaring in his ears, the horizon glowing with promise. He swung higher, faster, each arc smooth and certain. Below him, life carried on, messy, loud, imperfect. And maybe that was the point. Greatness wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about being superior. It was about rising again, choosing to do good even when the world didn't deserve it. Otto had finally learned that in his last breath, and Peter, for all his wisdom, was still learning it now. He landed on a radio tower as the sun broke through the skyline. The light touched the steel, the suit, the city, and for a moment everything felt whole again. Peter looked east toward the dawn and whispered, Sleep well, Doctor. Then he leapt forward, a red and blue streak vanishing into the morning. The web shimmered in the light, catching the first warmth of a new day, and somewhere, maybe in the soft hum of the city, maybe in the silence between heartbeats, a voice that no one could hear answered him. Well done, boy.